We need to start the recording here, but we do have a quorum, so give us 1 second where our tech team will start the meeting. And we are now live.
Madam Chair, could you please turn your microphone on?
It was so short. We'll try that again. Good morning. It is Monday, April the 8th, 2024, and this is the Policy and Innovation Committee. We are called to order, and if we could begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you join me. Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And Mr. Cook, if you would take roll, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director McCauley for Burris.
Here.
Desmond.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Nisley.
Here.
Zaragoza. Schaefer.
Here.
Soon. Absent. Thomas. Absent. Vega. Absent. Vice Chair Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Vice Chair Vang.
Here.
And Chair Gallardo.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is an opportunity for public comment, and this is open public comment for any items that are not on our agenda. Mr. Clerk, do we have any public comment for non-agenda items?
There is no public comment.
Thank you. Then we'll move on to the consent calendar. Looking at the consent calendar, does anyone on the committee have anything that they wanted to pull or questions on consent? All right. Seeing any, do we have any public comment on any consent item?
There's no public comment.
Thank you. I'll second. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Do we need a roll call vote or we have everybody's?
Everybody's in person, so we can.
Perfect. Even better. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to our first action item, item 5, the memorandum of understanding with El Dorado County Transportation Commission and Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. And Eric Johnson is going to be our presenter.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to bring this item to you today. Just briefly, I'll touch on some of the key points in this item and happy to go into any detail. Since the 1990s, SACOG has had memoranda of understanding with El Dorado and Placer transportation agencies. In the state of California, there's actually 3 agencies that are state designated regional transportation planning agencies, SACOG, and then for El Dorado County, the EDCTC, and for Placer County, PCTPA. We've worked through that time on collaborating on our shared goals and requirements to do transportation planning. But the reason for renewing these memoranda of understanding stems from a federal corrective action that was imposed on the state of California a couple of years ago that stated that the way that federal funds were programmed, meaning awarded to local jurisdictions and others, needed to change, that it was only the federally designated MPO, which SACOG is for the entire 6-county region, that actually could make those decisions. And so over the course of the last few years, we've worked with this board as well as with the staff at those 2 agencies to really figure out how do we maintain the independence of those 2 agencies that we work closely with to fulfill their state responsibilities while also answering the federal requirements that SACOG has as a unique MPO. And so the result of that is 2 new MOUs that we have with each of these 2 agencies. They're not presented to you in a red line because we took this opportunity to kind of look at them with a fresh set of eyes to figure out how do we detail out what do these agencies do uniquely, what does SACOG do uniquely, and how can we actually set up a working arrangement so that we're working more collaboratively together and formalize some of these things that have been informal in the past. The only other thing I will state about the item before I'm happy to take any questions is we also renegotiated the way in which we're compensated for the work that SACOG does. In the past, there was a higher amount that each of these agencies contributed to SACOG. As a result of changing the federal funding and SACOG having more of a role in that, we've agreed to reduce the amount of funding directly paid to SACOG, but each agency still is going to be making an annual financial contribution that will increase over time based on inflation to compensate SACOG for the services that we do provide to EDCTC and PCTPA. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee?
Madam Chair, I don't have any questions. I do have comments. Would you like those now? or would you-
Absolutely.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
So I just wanted to, on behalf of PCTPAs, thank you very much for negotiating the changes and also the rate reduction in the contribution. We appreciate that as well. But I think that this establishes a firm basis for moving forward and very supportive of this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Madam Chair, same, I'll just say ditto. We have the exact same thoughts from EDCTC, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, the same. I think it's more reflective of the actual work that's being done. And so I think everyone appreciates it and it's just a more accurate structures. With that, I will open it up for public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment for this item.
Thank you. Then I'll bring it back for a motion.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 6, and this is the second amendment to the budget and overall work program. And Loretta is going to be our presenter.
Good morning. Loretta Sue, Finance Director. So this item is seeking board approval to approve amendment number 2 to the budget and OWP for fiscal year 2023-24. Staff had taken a conservative approach to forecasting revenues and expenditures and only included grants and revenue that are secure in the adopted budget. And as new fund source coming into SACOG for the region, staff is proposing amendment to the budget. So today, staff is proposing amendment number 2 to the budget. This includes some of the changes in revenue that is included in the updated OWP and budget for the fiscal year. This includes some past due funds for the transit operator. This is the California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTAR, had recently approved or awarded $2.2 million of a past due funds to transit operators to purchase the touchless fare system. Because these funds are part of the region, so SACOG is the recipient of those funds, and then it will be passed through to the transport operator. That is approximately $2.2 million there. And then also in the amendment number 2, it's reflected a reduction of the Transportation Development Act, or LTF funds, of $404,000. This is due to lower sales projections for the Sacramento County. And then also included other revenue adjustment of approximately $365,000 that is reflected in the amendment number 2. And also, in the amendment number 2, they've reflected some additional changes to the fund balance. This includes a reduction of $439,000 of SACOG managed fund, and then also saving of $465,000 of the unassigned fund balance, of which the board approved originally $900,000 was included in the adopt budget, but due to some of the timing of expenditures that is related to the consulting costs of the discretionary grants, so some of these costs are included in the fiscal year 2024 and 25, so it's not needed in the fiscal year 2023-24. The amendment number 2 also included some reallocations of staff hour between projects, but it has no impact on the overall budget on that. And then also the a reduction or changes or increased changes of fund balance of $32,000 of other reserve fundings. This is just a quick highlight of the revenue that is included in the amendment number 2 to the budget. Total revenue forecasted for fiscal year 23-24 reflect $35.7 million, an increase of $1.4 million compared to the amendment number 1. This, again, is mainly due to the increase of the past due fund that I mentioned earlier. In here, it's also showing the total revenue that is coming from the federal sources, 35%, make up 35% federal funds, state fund 46%. This is mainly the REAP 1 housing and also the Green Means Go pass-through funds for the member jurisdictions, and other and local funds makes up the remaining 17%. Here's just a quick overview of the expenditures by category. Total expenditure for the fiscal year is 37.2 million, an increase of 539,000 comparing to the amendment number 1 of 36.7 million. Staff costs makes up about 35% of the overall budget. Consulting costs 14%, and then pass-through costs is 42%. Again, this is mainly the REAP and Green Means Go funding. Other costs makes up the remaining 27% of that. For more information regarding the detail of the budget, please refer to all the attachment that is included in the staff item. So in summary, the total expenditure is projected to be 37.2 million, which includes 13 million of staff costs, regional project and pass-through costs of 15.6 million, and consulting and other costs of 8.6 million. The project revenue is 35.7 million and also includes proposed use of fund balance of 1.5 million that should cover the budget gaps. Staff is recommending that the Policy and Innovation Committees recommend to the board to approve the amendment number 2 to the budget and OWP for fiscal year 2023-24. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Open it up for questions from the committee.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So how many full-time employees does SACOG have?
Full-time,
We have approximately 60 full-time employees.
And are they open positions?
There is
One.
one open position.
Are the open positions, high level, open position, entry level? Where are those positions?
So that-
How would that, how would hiring then, filling that position, would that affect the budget?
The current open position is budgeted, so all the positions that we advertise for, they're included in an adopted budget before that. the time we
Thank you.
advertise.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? I think just the only one that I had, and obviously on consent, we just did the increase for staff, which is part of our contract that goes through 2027, I believe.
Yeah, through June of 2027, we have an MOU, correct?
And that's all budgeted in here.
That is.
And then as well as the impact of the PTPA that we just did
Correct.
and El Dorado County.
Yes, so that's actually coming up in the next item. So the 24-25 budget reflects both the reduction in revenues from El Dorado and Placer County agencies, as well as the 3.5% COLA. It's a fluctuating COLA based on the CPI as reported by the state from December to December, year over year.
Great.
It is capped at 4%.
Madam Chair, just a quick question. So we're proposing to use 1.5 million in fund balance or reserves. And so what does that bring our reserve balance to? And does SACOG have a policy for, how much in reserves we need to carry from year to year? What is that?
Loretta can start. Yeah. happy to-
Yes, so actually in the next item, I do have a slide that show the estimated fund balance as of June 30th, 2024. And then, yes, we do have a fund balance policy, which is also included in the next item. That is, I'm going to highlight a little bit more, but we do have a fund balance policy that has reserve that is set aside for operating expenses. That's currently in there. And also use of the SACOG managed fund. What are the uses of the SACOG managed fund also too?
I think maybe a little bit of context I could offer is, so when you look at our fund balance, there's about 12 different line items that compose the fund balance itself. And so when you're looking at how are we managing our day-to-day operating costs of staff and other ongoing commitments that we have, as Loretta made reference to, we do have a board adopted policy of having 3 months of operating cash reserve.
Okay.
Our overall fund balance is made up of several different components. As she mentioned, the SACOG managed fund is one of those. And so sometimes when you'll see a reduction, or you'll see us using up some fund balance, that isn't necessarily making us more vulnerable should there be a downturn, because those are one-time costs for projects and other things that we do seek board approval for those reductions in fund balance. But overall, we've been growing our operating cash reserves that would allow us to weather an economic downturn for our ongoing commitments to staff and other long-term costs.
So then this change will not affect our 3-month operating reserve?
Correct, that's
Okay,
untouched.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, if not, then I'll open it up for public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment for this item.
All right, thank you. We'll close public comment, bring it back, and I will look for a motion.
I'll move the item.
Thank you, Director Saragosa.
Director Jones, second.
Thank you. All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. We will move on to our next item. And continuing on the budget conversation will be the final budget and overall work plan for 2024-25. And Loretta will continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so this is the proposed final budget for fiscal year 2024-25. As required by federal regulations and mandates, SACOG is required to develop an overall work program, also known as OWP, and budget annually. The OWP include projects and activities that support Sacramento region and also SACOG core planning activity for the upcoming fiscal year. The overall work plan activities for fiscal year 2024-25 align and support SACOG's 3 strategic goals: the equity, economy, and environment. So staff has submitted a draft budget to federal and state agency for review and comment back in March to ensure that the activity are consistent with the purpose of funding source that's supporting the work program. And the board approved the release of the draft budget and OWP for public comment at its March meeting. The OWP require approval of the federal and state agency before costs can be incurred. So staff is recommending that the Policy and Innovation Committees recommend to the board to take actions to adopt the final budget and OWP for the fiscal year 2024-25 at its April meeting next week. Staff has provided an overview of the 2024 work program and also the draft budget to the board at its March meeting. So today I'm just going to briefly highlight some of the changes from the draft to the final budgets for the fiscal year 24-25. Some of the additional fund that we have received includes the most recent award of the $22.5 million of the Green Means Go funding from the Department of Transportation. Because this is a multi-year funding program, so only $2.3 million of that fund is reflected in the fiscal year 2024-25. The final budget also including a pass-through funds to U-Bus Sutter Transit of $339,000. Due to the limitation of the U-Bus Sutter Transit contracting directly to Caltrans, so SACOG is going to be receiving that fund and pass through to the transit agency. The final budget also reflected some minor adjustment to other revenue and also staff amongst different projects. I wanted to note that the draft budget and also the draft OWP document that is included with the Policy and Innovation Committees did not included comments that just received from the federal and state partners. However, there is no fiscal impact to the budget, and then there's just minor updates to the OWP document and the budgets. So staff will make those final revisions to those documents and will be submitting it, presented to the board at the April meeting. I also want to note that SACOG budget does not include any transportation funding that is passed through directly to member jurisdiction and transportation operators. It only includes revenue that is related to SACOG operations, with the exception of some of one-time funding that like the REAP 1 funding and also the Green Means Go that is passed through to member jurisdictions. So here's just a quick highlight or overview of the total revenue for the fiscal year. So the final budget, including an estimate revenue of $37.6 million, an increase of 2.8 million compared to the draft budget of 34.8 million. As you can see from the chart here, 37% of the revenue come from the federal government. This includes the one-time raise grant that's received for the SACOG region and also the Green Means Go funding that just recently awarded and included in the budget, and also some of the formula funding from the federal government for SACOG planning activities. State funding makes up 46% of the overall budget. Again, this is mainly the pass-through fund related to the REAP 1 housing and also the Green Means Go from the state. Other funding makes up the remaining 17% of the total budgets. This is a quick overview of the total expenditures by category. Total expenditure for the fiscal year is 41.3 million, increase of 2.9 million compared to the draft budget of 38.4 million. As you can see from the chart, staff costs makes up 33% of the total budgets, consulting costs 12%, pass-through costs 44%, and all other costs makes up the remaining 11% of the budgets there. For more detail on the expenditures, you can refer to the attachment B that is included in the staff item that show expenditures and revenue by categories, and also attachment E show the expenses by OWP activities and projects. Included in the proposed final budget also include the proposed use of the fund balance. So here is an estimate of the fund balance at June 30th, 2024, kind of broken down into different categories. So included in the proposed final budget include the use of reserve funds for board and advocacy and other restrict fund of approximately 245,000, and included in the proposed budget and use of 900,000 of the unassigned fund balance. Again, this includes some of the consulting costs, one-time costs that was included in the 2023-24 budget, but due to the timing of those expenditures, that will not happen in the 23-24 fiscal year, so it got deferred into the new fiscal year. And also included in the 900,000 is some of the one-time costs that is related to the Blueprint Environmental Impact Report that is that will be happening in fiscal year 24-25. And then some of the staff costs to cover for the EEI program that is also proposed using the reserve unassigned fund balance for that. Included in the final budget also the use of SACOG managed fund of 1.3 million of previously approved projects. This includes the community design project that was approved through the funding rounds. Also, the board previously approved using SACOG managed fund for the race grant cash match, and then also partial funding for the EEI program. So that is part of the SACOG managed fund. Additionally, staff is proposing using $1.3 million to loan to Carter, the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority of $1.3 million. In February, the Carter Board designated SACOG to be the administering agency for its operations and then approved spending SACOG funds on some of the initial support for establishing the Carter. However, Carter does not have any source of revenue, so staff is proposing a loan of $1.3 million using SACOG managed fund to Carter to be repaid back in the future when there's revenue available from Carter. A draft agreement between SACOG and Carter and also a promissory note are included in the attachment J. So if there's any question, happy to answer that, or Eric can answer that too. So in summary, the total proposed final budget includes expenditures of 41.3 million, which includes staff costs of 13.7 million, regional project and pass-through costs of 18.9 million, consulting and other costs of 8.7 million. And also included in the proposed budget estimate revenue is 37.6 with the use of fund balance, including previously approved use of SACOG managed fund and unassigned fund balance of 3.7 million. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Questions from the committee? Any questions? I have a couple. On the pass-through funds, and I'm just curious, we have a deficit on the pass-through. Is that timing? I mean, it seems like if it's passed through, it should be balance out what we're receiving and what's handing out. So on the combined budget expenditures, so we have pass-through costs of 16.5 and the final is 18.2. So that's an increase.
It's an increase. So that is related to the new revenues, pass-through revenue that I mentioned earlier. So basically that's increase with the Green Means Go award funding that we recently received from the Department of Transportation. So that's an increase. And then those funds will be passed to the 10 project that was included in the applications.
All right, so we don't have it specific now, but what we received, we will be passing that entire amount.
That's
forward.
correct. So out of the 22.5 million, 500,000 of that is going to be kept at SACOG as an administrative cost of the for administering the grant. The remaining 22 million will be passed through to the project that is included in the applications. And then, of course, this is a multi-years funding, so not all of the full 22.5 million is included in the 24-25 budgets. So it will be spread out over the next 3 years.
Thank you. And then the other question I had, I'm just curious, following up a little bit on Allison's question. So do we have a required, I know if you're a school district, if you're a large school district, you're required to have 2% reserve, a smaller 3%. Do we have any requirement? Or is that just the 3% operating funds? Is that something that we determined on our own?
There is no requirement, but included in our fund balance policy that we're hoping to have a total of 3 months worth of operating reserve that is set aside for funding future operations, right? Right now, we're not there yet. We have approximately about 2.1 million. However, we do have other contingency funds. So if you're looking at the chart there, so contingency and operating reserve, that is approximately 3.7 million right now, in addition to the unassigned fund balance of approximately 4.5 million.
And if Madam Chair, if I could just add a little context too, I think, Loretta is correct that we haven't hit that target, but I just want to give her some credit that under her leadership in May 2021, we actually established this 3-month goal. So that will rise over time. Prior to that point, SACOG had a fixed dollar amount of $1.5 million for many, many years. And so really we were probably lower than we should have been in terms of a fund balance policy, but we have been growing that over the last several years.
And it does make sense to, as opposed to having a fixed number, to do operating costs. I know that we do that with Pioneer Community Energy and in the city and others, so.
Thank you. Any other questions for, if not, then we'll open public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment for this item.
All right, thank you. Then we will close public comment. I'll bring it back to the committee.
Madam Chair, I'll move adoption of the final budget and overall work program.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to our next item. It's our information item, and Renee DeViroki is going to be our advocacy update present.
All right, let me see if I can get nice and close so you can hear me. Good morning, Renee DeViroki. I'm part of your Government and Public Affairs team. So we have, as you noted, this is an information item today. So we'll have 2 presentations. We're going to hear a little bit about what's happening in Washington, D.C. I know a lot of us are flying back to cap, so we're hoping to give you a little bit of what's happening there, as well as highlight what we've a little bit about what Roberta was talking about, the $22.5 million win for Green Means Go. Then we'll transition over to our state advocacy update. So about 10 minutes for each. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hand it off to Devin Barnhart, who will start with our federal update.
Oh, sorry, it took a minute for my camera to get on. One, I just wanted to start by saying congratulations to SACOG and to all of you who have been sort of tirelessly working on Green Means Go. I think the grant that SACOG just received from the Department of Transportation is really recognition of the regional effort that folks undertook to start establishing the Green Means Zone or Green Means Go in the zones. This grant that we got was really focused on reconnecting neighborhoods and communities. And I think this is an acknowledgement that in many instances, the kinds of grants they were funding were like perhaps like covering a bridge or covering a tunnel or removing infrastructure that was blocking communities, but it's also an acknowledgement of how important it is to reconnect communities by redeveloping these zones and having infill development. So I think it's a really big deal. I think the department's going to be really excited to see that the work that we're doing in this space. And so as we start implementing the grant and the dollars start flowing out the door, I think it'll be critically important that we also report that back to the federal government about how we're using those kinds of funds locally so that we can continue to push for increased funding for these kinds of programs. In that same vein, we, SACOG staff, and working with the Air Quality District, we've been doing a lot of work on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. This is a grant that was part of the big environmental bill that passed Congress a few years ago. They put out a big call for all of the communities to work together as regions and establish GHG reduction measures. And then once you went through that process of figuring out what were your region's goals, then you could apply for these implementation grants. We have just submitted that grant through the Air Quality District. Green Means Go is a big part of that grant. And sort of as folks are thinking about what might you want to talk about when you're in Washington, D.C., I think this is a great example of how our region can work together. And the more that the members of Congress and the agencies hear that this is a priority for the region, the better. There are shiny materials to highlight some of these pieces if you need any additional information on them, but want to flag that that is sort of top of mind as folks are back in Washington, D.C., because those grants just got submitted to the EPA. Or those grant applications just got submitted to the EPA. So it's a good one to push with members of our delegation. Bigger picture in Washington, D.C., it's appropriation season. Congress was very slow in wrapping up the last appropriations bill. It took a lot of back and forth to get to this point where they were able to pass the FY24 appropriations bill. We're now very much into the next cycle. And so members' offices are really focused on trying to get everybody's earmarks, policy provisions, and start gearing up for this next full cycle of appropriations process. And so many of those offices are either just closing up or underway. And so I think there'll be a good opportunity to flag as you're in Washington, any of those priorities that are coming through. One of the ones that we've been working on for SACOG is support for a program that's called YIMBY. It's also sometimes referred to as the PRO program. It is a HUD program that is aimed at improving local zoning and any kind of barriers to housing that might exist. One of the important components of that grant program is that you can also use that money for activities that you might find in Green Means Go, things like water and sewer infrastructure. So it's a beneficial program that sort of overlaps a lot of the work that the region is doing. MPOs are eligible applicants, and that program is funded annually through the appropriations process. And so we have some materials that we'll be talking to members of Congress about, and that we've been talking to the delegation already about supporting that program as they start the next year's funding cycle. Just a couple of other quick things to flag. There's transportation, there's not a ton going on in our space at this exact moment because we're sort of in the in-between phases. Lots of money's going out through grants, but we're not actively working on a bill. The one thing that folks are talking about is the bridge collapse that happened in the Baltimore area. It's a large topic of conversation because they need a significant amount of funding. So there's ongoing conversations about what that means. There's a lot of folks in Congress trying to figure out what does this mean for all of our bridges. I know this won't be as critically important to you, but folks will certainly be looking at Bay Area and other places where there's large cargo ships traveling near bridge piers. So that conversation is ongoing, and lots of folks are sort of raising that continually to figure out how we deal with that type of emergency funding. A couple of other issues, they are just starting, and I mean the very beginning phases of talking about reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Program. That's the main bill where we get most of our MPO regional funding. And that process, you might hear folks ask things like, what are you guys pushing for the next reauthorization? This is just like the very beginning conversations. We're a few years off from diving into the specifics of what that bill might look like. But it's a great time to talk about what we're doing in the region with the grant funding that we've gotten, what we're doing with our planning money, all those kinds of projects that are underway are a good example to show to the delegation that federal money is critically important to the work that we're doing as a region. And then just one last flag, it's in the report as well, but it's an especially tough time in Congress right now. Jason and I have been saying this for probably years now, but in this exact moment, it's a very tough time because of various retirements and members of Congress on the House side leaving. It has put the voting margins really, really close. They only have a couple of members that can flip a bill. So it's tighter than it has ever been in the House in recent history. And the Senate sort of always has its own challenges. And so there's lots and lots of talks about like how we're going to do things. For us in the transportation world, a little bit less of an impact besides the emergency funding that Baltimore might be facing. There aren't a ton of transportation bills that are coming down the pipeline or that are majorly impacting any of our funding streams now that the appropriations bill has passed. So there will be lots in the news about Congress having issues, but it's largely tied to other issues. And hopefully we're a little more settled as we get back into the bills that directly impact funding for the region. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Devin. Any questions? I think you covered it.
Awesome. Hope everyone who's going out has a great trip.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Devin. We'll go ahead and hand it over to Chris for our state update.
Hey, good morning, Chair Galdo, members of the committee. Chris Lee with Politico Group here to give the update on March advocacy activities and what's coming next in April and the budget process. So I'll start with a high-level budget overview and then move into kind of our key issue that we've been focused on, which is advocacy related to the Regional Early Action Planning Grant Program of 2021, also known as REAP 2.0. So, as you likely saw in the media, the legislature as well as the governor came to agreement on a package of early budget cuts. This is worth about $17.3 billion in savings, which come from a mix of $3.6 billion in reductions, $3.1 billion in delays, $5.2 billion in borrowing, $3.4 billion in fund shifts, so from the general fund to special funds, and then $2.1 billion in deferrals. And that's kind of we're just going to push the payroll date at the end of the year over into the following fiscal year, worth about $2.1 billion. Not a lot of direct impact on the specific priorities that SACOG has identified in the budget. There was an $85 million reduction to the foreclosure intervention prevention program that was approved, as well as approval of the $1 billion shift in that formula transit and intercity rail capital funding that SACOG receives. So $1 billion of that is being pushed out from 24-25 to 25-26. The budget also adopts a placeholder number for shifts to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund cap and trade revenues. That was about $500 million of that was going to be part of the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. But rather than approve those fund shifts for specific purposes, they just did a placeholder number saying we're counting on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund for about $1.8 billion of those fund shifts. The one item that is potentially of interest in terms of our priorities is part of the deal was authorizing the administration to freeze expenditures of one-time funds that were authorized in the last 3 budget acts. We've already seen that happen with the REAP 2.0 program, where HCD has said we're only going to reimburse you up to 25% of your grants. So there conceivably could be additional freezes, but this was an ask from the Assembly side, according to the budget documents that are out, and really, I think, designed to give the legislature a little bit more room to come up with what is the right mix of cuts and deferrals and reductions as we see the final budget start to develop. Where we are in the budget process, we're still in the subcommittee process. I'll give you a brief update on what's going on with REAP, but a few more weeks of subcommittee hearings, and then the governor's May revision will come out around May 15th. That'll have updated revenue numbers, and then it will really be a sprint to adoption of a budget by June 15th. So in terms of SACOG's top priority that we've been working on this year, the REAP hearings happened. I had to look at the calendar just after our last P&I committee meeting in March. The Senate heard the item for the first time on March 14th. I think we did a great job in terms of turning out both jurisdictions as well as SACOG and working with the subcommittee members to identify key issues. I would say the Senate hearing was pretty focused on kind of technical, I would say, issues like why was this program selected for cuts? What constitutes an encumbrance of funds? And so I think going into the hearing, we were a little worried that the policy focus here, which is how are we achieving our greenhouse gas reduction goals? How are we achieving our housing goals? How are we funding implementation of SB 375, which has been something the legislature has been working on very diligently for the last several years, trying to come up with how do we push implementation beyond just planning, was worried that was going to be lost a little bit in all the technical questions. But I think the testimony from SACOG, from other MPOs around the state, and really linking this kind of strangely named program that's sort of vague with actual housing production and actual achievement of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, I think was a success. Great comments from the chair about, basically saying he assumed that maybe the department and the administration didn't realize how much work was actually going on and how far down the path it was based on just the amount of money that had been submitted for reimbursement. Senator Lola Smallwood Cuevas, who is from the SCAG region from Los Angeles, made comments about how do we know what is the actual housing production impact of these funds, which is something where SACOG has great data on that, and questioned about what are the funds in the mix of cuts that local agencies are already relying upon. And then Senator Nilo, of course, for our local voice, voiced his belief in the importance of the projects that SACOG is doing. So very good outcome, I think, from that. The item was held open, which is typical. And then we will have tomorrow, for the first time, a similar hearing in the Assembly Subcommittee number 5, which covers housing and general government issues. That agenda is up. There's a good discussion not only of the policy links with SB 375 and greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but also a really exhaustive 12-point program of all the steps that the MPOs took to get this funding out to communities and allocated to projects that are really going to drive those housing and greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And I know that came directly from the California Association of Councils of Government. There's a panel at tomorrow's hearing that has SCAG, so Southern California Association of Governments, as well as the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, to really demonstrate that both large and small MPOs are using this funds to really push on those key state goals. And so SACOG will be represented again at that hearing, and any testimony from local jurisdictions that puts this planning sounding program in the context of real projects, real housing units, real infrastructure, it continues to be helpful. So on that note, we had a good meeting last week with the staff from the Assembly Budget Subcommittee covering this. they said that we've been doing a good job of really raising the issue, getting people familiar with what this program is. And so that was good to hear because they're not shy about telling you when you need to really highlight an issue and to make progress. There's a good delegation letter that was circulated by Assemblymember Friedman from Burbank, has lots of members from the SACOG delegation on board. And so I think we are really making an impact and showing legislators the importance of this program. And I think the important thing right now is to just continue keeping up that pressure and awareness so that folks know what this program's doing and how important it is. And so with that, I'll pause and see if there are any questions, but really that's been our main focus over the last month and will continue to be up until the budget is presumably approved by June 15th.
Thank you. Questions on this, on our update? Oh, no, I didn't say welcome. Darn. Any questions? Yes, Chair Zaragoza.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the update. Do you anticipate the majority of the, I guess the cuts or the funding to go through October with the on trailer bills, at least or do you think everything will be done actually in June?
Well, I mean, the requirement, the constitutional
I know
requirement
that,
is the balanced budget, right,
Yeah.
by June 15th. So I think the main thing that I'm watching for is what are our revenue projections, right? We started with about a $10 billion gulf between the legislative analyst and the governor. The LAO said that's grown by another 15 billion. So we're looking at potentially a $73 billion budget problem. And so looking at, we had some slightly good news on personal income tax withholdings last month, waiting for the finance bulletin for March to come out. So I think there will be a budget in place by June 15th. The question will be what's going on with revenues and how far apart is that from what we continue to see with data about revenues coming in. So, I mean, as you can see from the list, $2.1 billion from kind of pushing out payroll. So, right, these are things that are pretty temporary measures in some cases, and then there's also real reductions. So, I think it's just going to be a question of how much does the legislature think is appropriate to, do with sort of temporary measures like that versus real cuts. What does the administration think? And so, and then also just the magnitude of the problem.
Thank you. What, from your office visits, how do you, I mean, obviously there's probably, I think there's 2, maybe 3 members that were here during when we were in office, when all we did was cuts. So
Yeah.
this is all unfamiliar territory to legislators and staff, in terms of going through deficits that they're going to be facing for at least probably three budget cycles. I'm just wondering is there even a sense of urgency at this point? I mean, I know they have the early cuts we'll see what that looks like, the 17 billion, but I'm just wondering because it's going to be tough for them. I mean, it's going to be tough for them to get to any number, whether it's 70 or 50 or 40 or wherever in between. Are they actually prepared to have to face this?
Yeah, I think that's the key question. I'll just say, as of even a few weeks ago, we were having clients who were getting, hey, give us your earmark requests. And so I think, and folks that were around in the, Great Recession, it's like, is that really, priority? Is that really realistic here? And I
Yeah.
think both, the Assembly, I think more quickly kind of backed off of that. I think the Senate has now, but I think that kind of shows a disconnect between what we're seeing as a pretty significant budget problem and folks' experience with engaging with the budget. So,
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Good question. One I have is you mentioned deferrals, which we're used to, and then also delays. Can you explain the difference in the deferral and the delay?
I think the delays, there's probably a technical definition. I think the delays are over a longer period of time. But I would kind of, yeah. I mean, the list of the things that are in the deferral bucket, it's UCCSU payroll pushing that out and the state employee payroll pushing that out. So those are, I'm sure DOF has a technical definition. What it appears to me is like the very short-term items versus like we're pushing $1 billion of TIRSIP out for a whole fiscal year. Like that's a pretty significant delay.
Got it. Thank you. James,
Chris,
did you?
Chris, I was, obviously, we want to thank you for all of your efforts to date on weighing in. Those of you that have weighed in your state legislators on this item. So they understand from you all from a local level. Can you just give the policy committee an update on who signed on the sign-on letter from the members and also who else sent a letter?
Yeah, so Senator Nilo sent his own letter, and then we have a bipartisan, bicameral slice of the SACOG delegation that's on Assemblymember Friedman's letter. And so Assemblymember McCarty, Assemblymember Hoover, Assemblymember Patterson, and Senator Dodd. I do think it would be maybe a little bit unusual we have a lot of members, frankly, in leadership in our delegation, and so I do think it might be a little unusual for, like, for instance, the majority leader to sign on to a letter like that, because it's really the budget committee and that's kind of their domain. But I think all of the members are well aware of the projects in their district. I think because SACOG's so far along in this process compared to even some of the other jurisdictions who are also doing a great job, that it's been really easy to demonstrate, here's what's in your district, here's the status, here's the housing units that we were predicting from that. And so I think the awareness is really high. I know members were, because of the significant deficit, were pretty reluctant to kind of sign on to a lot of these letters. But I think hearing from you all and hearing, in the case of, for instance, Senator Dodd, he's got projects in his MTC area as well as in his SACOG jurisdiction. And so that was what pushed him over the bubble and got him to sign on to that letter.
And Chris, what else do you think right now or the next, few weeks, few months, could board members, how could they engage?
Yeah, I think if you've already kind of sent a letter from your jurisdiction outlining the specifics, that's very helpful. I think the other thing that's helpful is to think about other organizations that you engage with that may or may not be following the budget process, particularly anyone who's focused on housing, environment, business, equity, all of the things that are rolled up in the Green Means Go plan. So those groups tend to also be engaged through associations and others in the budget process. And so getting a broader coalition, I think we've done a great job with the MPOs and the local governments, but to the extent there's other groups that might be persuaded to weigh in, I think now is the time to reach out to them.
And I know you all know this, but for those of you that were going all the way back to the origin story of Green Means Go, which was 2019, our last long range plan, right? We looked at that and we said, look, we need a lot of infill development and commercial corridor revitalization, and we can't just wish for it. We have to actually act on it and do something. And that's, as you heard at the lunch last Thursday, that's where Green Means Go came from. All of you weighed in on that. 28 of 28 jurisdictions supported the program. 26 of 28 of you have adopted green zones. And so when Chris says we're pretty far along, that's part of what he means. He also means you awarded the 34 million this time last year from the state in this REAP 2.0. It looks to the state like that's all sitting in a big old balance, right? Because it hasn't been spent, but it hasn't been spent because it's reimbursement. And you all now have bids on the street, or you've opened bids, or you've awarded work to do water, sewer, and utility upgrades that will unlock housing units. And so that's real money, right? And your relationships, at the beginning of every year, we ask you, who are you close to? Who could you make a phone call to in the Senate or the Assembly? Thank you for doing that, because this is exactly how we use that kind of information. And so I would just say too, I know you all will see your senator or your assembly member, informally. You might run into them I know they hate being in the grocery store, but you'll say hi to them, or just continuing to make sure they understand how important this is for our region. Because a 50% cut, or as HCD has suggested now, a 75% cut, right, will just send a huge chilling effect on these projects. So thank you for all the work you've done, and there is a lot more to come in the next couple of months.
Thanks.
Thank you. I don't know if we need any public comment. Do we have any public comment on this?
There's no public comment on this item.
Well, thank you. We are going to move into closed session for item number 9. It is the public employee evaluation, executive director, government code, under government code section 54957. And before we resumed into closed session, do we have any public comments?
There's no public comment.
All right, thank you. Then we will adjourn to closed session.
Just give our technical team a couple minutes here to get us closed session.
Nothing to report. And our next item on the agenda would be for other matters. We have anything?
One thing I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention is that there is no May meeting of the committee. We'll be back together in June.
Yeah. Perfect. I think that's,
Madam Chair, a couple of things on my end. Speaking of the May board meeting, Chair Saragosa has asked you all to, and we've given you copies of Color of Law. That's a big part of our sort of housing intersection with our racial equity work. And we have secured, before the May board meeting at 8 a.m., we've secured Mulvaney's. Patrick Mulvaney is ready to host you, and we'll have Bill Higgins as a facilitator for that. So please RSVP, that's in my executive director update. So 8 a.m. at Mulvaney's, and then we can walk down here, get down here for your 9:30 a.m. May 16th board meeting. We talked about the Denver trip. We now, for the board, June 26th to 28th, we have all the details firmed up, at least the flights. And if you don't have it already, you will soon get a registration link. We're flying out Wednesday afternoon. You could make your own arrangements, but the group flight is Wednesday afternoon, about 3 p.m. from Sacramento on the 26th, coming back here by the end of the day, Friday. And we've got the hotel secured. We're now just working on the itinerary. I can tell you folks in Denver are very excited to host you. And we think there's gonna be a lot of very relevant information as we talk through the blueprint and housing and transfer development and suburban revitalization, all on display in Denver. That's that. Then the last thing I would just say, just to follow up on your advocacy update, do keep in mind when you go back to cap, Devin Barnhart mentioned the CPRG, Climate Pollution Reduction Grant application. That was a huge 7-county application and effort, $90+ million. We have food and agriculture and carbon sequestration, mobility hubs across 7 counties, and Green Means Go. It'd be great in those meetings that are relevant for you to be able to mention this, because EPA now has those, and our congressional delegation is going to be key to making sure that we're competitive and get funded. What we will do is make sure you all know if your jurisdictions are written into that grant. Even if they're not, it would be great for you to mention it. But if they are, it would be good for you to know. So when you meet with your members, your representatives, the senators, anybody else to talk that up will be really important. So we'll get you that information. We'll get you the registration link to Denver, and it's all good. We'll see you in DC.
yes.
Can I just follow up? Thank you for mentioning that, James. And because I haven't been tapped in with the transportation work group for cap to cap. So I think it would be good for all the SACOG board members to have some of these talking points, so we can take advantage of these, maybe these one-off conversations or other meetings that we're having.
Yeah, you have a lot to talk about at cap to cap this year. That's the good news. We just won that $22.5 million grant. And by the way, if your jurisdiction is in that grant, it's good to thank our delegation, because they worked hard. They weigh in. They got that. They helped us on that 22.5. If you're in that $90+ million grant, it's really good to mention that and to know about it. And don't forget, as a board, you just took an action to prioritize that short list of projects that are transportation projects that are currently in the mix for other grant programs. Good to mention that as well. So we'll make sure that that's.
Yeah, just don't presume that I'm going to remember these things.
No,
So
we
that's
never
what I'm
assume that. We never assume. Just wear your pin, and then if there's a little button on there, if you press it, it'll tell you everything you need to know.
All right, well, with that, as you mentioned, this committee does not meet in May, and so our next meeting will be June 3rd, but we will see you obviously for our full board meeting. Thank you all.